So hi everyone, my name is Reema and I'm here to talk a little bit today about when gender becomes toxic. And what I mean by that is that the patriarchy affects us all. And now, considering the conversations that have happened in the last couple weeks, for example, because of the Gillette ad that came out about toxic masculinity, or even the conversations that have been happening in the last couple years about feminism, a lot of folks kind of talk to me and they say, well, I turn off when I hear words like patriarchy and gender and feminism. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try to make it a little bit accessible, and let's see how we do. So when we're talking about gender, I wanted to make sure we were just on the same page. So what I mean by patriarchy is any system that is male-dominated or led by men. What that means is any governmental system that is male-dominated and led by men, which is historically most of the world and currently most of the world, but other organizations as well, even up to and including some families. Some families defer to their male adult parent to set the rules and the guidelines of the family. I'm also going to be talking about a couple of things around gender. So what I mean by sex assigned at birth is when a doctor looks at a baby's anatomy and assigns a sex to that baby. Usually that is male or female. When I talk about gender and gender identity is how a person identifies. Cisgender means that a person's identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth, and transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, and or other gender identity terms can refer to a person's gender identity that does not necessarily align all the time with their sex assigned at birth. That is to say, perhaps a person was assigned female at birth and now identifies as male. Gender expression is the ways that people express their gender identity. So, for example, I was assigned female at birth. I currently identify as female, but sometimes I walk around in men's sweatpants or, shop exclusively in the men's section at Mark's Work Wearhouse. What that might mean is that even though I am identified female at birth and a woman, I express myself in a way that's not necessarily feminine. So I just want you to keep some of those things in mind. Good so far? Awesome. Now, the patriarchy creates a binary approach to gender. What that means is, from a historical perspective, from a patriarchal historical perspective, we are looking at a binary approach. So, male and female, and that's it. That is the only thing that we have acknowledged from a patriarchal perspective. So what makes a man? When we talk about what makes a man, we talk about things like strength. We talk about violence, we talk about courage, toughness, financial or other types of independence. We talk about men being the breadwinner. We talk about assertiveness and power, stoicism or not showing any emotions, the color blue, working with your hands, being athletic, enjoying sports, being buff or jacked or even bearded. What makes a man is different culture to culture, community to community, but I just chose some examples from Western society and where we're at today. Now, I would argue, and I would like to posit today, that very rigid gender construction is a toxic thing. What that means is that when we force people whose sex assigned at birth is male to be this person, we are not allowing for people to be who they really are and or could be. So what do I mean by that? I mean that, for example, the idea of the primary breadwinner could look like the pressure to make money, the fear, and could turn into the fear of failure. Very stressful. We have this idea that even if, for example, your partner makes more money than you, that could be stressful. Your partner makes all of the money for your family, and that can still apply pressure onto men. And then we see people who are stressed out. We see people who feel as though their male identity is being assailed. Also, the pressure to be, for example, athletic and strong. Earlier today, we saw a talk about the idea of conforming a body and not being enough. And I would like to posit that this idea of being athletic and strong and forcing men to fit a certain mold, especially in recent years, forcing men to fit a certain mold of masculinity creates distress about body shape. We see a lot of young men now, and younger, who are having unhealthy approaches to diet, unhealthy approaches to working out, and in fact, putting more and more pressure on what their body, quote unquote, should look like. Now, I, as a therapist, deal in emotions. So this is a little bit complicated, and I'm going to kind of point and say words. But basically, what this comes down to is masculinity can become toxic because of the fact that we tell men they should not show any emotions. No emotions. And so, that idea of like assertiveness and power and toughness can come out as anger. But the pressure to be strong and stoic leads to people bottling their emotions up, which can lead to things like loneliness, depression, addiction. We see higher rates of completed suicide in men. We also see that this pressure to be strong or stoic leads to people feeling shame or guilt about their emotions coming out. That is to say, if I, for example, have an outburst, I as a man might be very stressed out about the fact that I had an outburst and I'll have to try to like correct all of my behavior. But we also have this other thing, which is the inability to understand emotions correctly and the inability to communicate emotions. So, I mean, I've had a number of conversations with a number of people. I'm around 28. A lot of people I know are married, and they have conversations like, oh, you know, I can't understand my wife, kind of idea, or I don't understand women. But this is a joke about a very real issue. We do not teach men how to understand or read emotions. There's distress around not understanding. There's anger around not interpreting. Then there's shame about the anger. It's like a whole thing. But also, we have the inability to communicate emotions. And that leads to things like outbursts of anger and, in fact, outbursts of violence. We see, and I'm not suggesting that domestic violence is only because of the fact that men are taught to be masculine, but if you have no ability to communicate your emotions, no ability to understand emotions, any emotions that you might feel that are not anger, jealousy, sadness, fear, shame, stress, all of these things can come out in angry ways. And so, as a person who works with folks who are survivors of domestic violence and survivors of sexual violence, this is something that I see. I see that when people do not know how to communicate or identify their emotions or the emotions of other people, then anger and violence can ensue. So if we're gonna switch to the other side of that binary, what makes a woman? We consider this idea, when we talk about femininity, we push women into this box of gentleness, empathy or compassion, sensitivity, shy, quiet, passive, women should be caring or caregivers, tolerant, deferent, dependent, the color pink, I chose purple, but the color pink, and service to other people. Now, how can these things become toxic? This idea of tolerance and gentleness can create a pressure to tolerate bad behavior and an inability to disclose violence. What does that mean? That means that when bad things are happening in your life, you don't want to be deemed as over-emotional or crazy or something else. And so we have this inability to talk about the things that are happening in our lives. Additionally, we have this role of caregiving. We tell many women that they should be people pleasers, that they should be caregiving, that they should be taking care of other people, often at the expense of themselves, which can lead to things like burnout and resentment. Also, as I mentioned earlier with the tolerance idea, understanding. So the pressure to only have non-angry emotions. You don't want to be seen as the ridiculous person who's having angry outbursts about things. And we teach girls and women that they should not be a person who shows anger. Therefore, we can have these identifications of things that are like shame about feelings, or shame about anger, or feeling irrational when you feel angry about tolerating or seeing negative behavior in your life, or abusive behavior in your life. Now, what does this mean? I'm going to come back to that. So what does this mean? What this means is that in a world where we are shifting which people are allowed where, that is to say, we say that women have been given the vote, women have been given the ability to do any job. And that means that we are gendering our children and pushing them aggressively into these boxes, and then they are going out into the world, into a world that actually has much bigger spectrums and much bigger spaces. And so having, highly gendering our children can be a problem because we're not allowing them to be ready for the quote-unquote real world. Especially as society is shifting for adults, we should also see if we can work on shifting what we teach our children. What about folks outside the binary? So, there are people who exist outside the gender binary. That is to say, their gender identity does not align with their sex assigned at birth. So, people around a child can push their ideas of what a child should look like, act like, and dress like based on their sex assigned at birth. And when people do not align as cisgender or within the gender binary, they are often met with resistance, psychological, physical, and sexual violence. People around them try to force them into dressing or behaving with the traits that align with their sex assigned at birth, rather than allowing people to exist the way they want to exist. There are many stories of things as seemingly innocuous as, a boy choosing a doll, or, a girl wanting to play a certain sport that's more masculine. And all of a sudden, parents and people and in the school systems and in spaces that cater to children are suddenly very up in arms about these ideas, where in reality, why not let them play football? Or play with a doll, or do things that are traditionally not of their gender? What actually happens? And that's the question I kind of want people to consider today. I kind of want people to consider what's really wrong with allowing your child to just be who they are and allowing people to be who they are. So, the topic of today was all we need is, and I think that all we need is cultural shift when it comes to gender. Thank you very much.